Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jana Martin. I'm Associate Director at the Language Institute at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. It's actually a pretty nice day today. So welcome, everyone. This is the third session of our Spring 2023 series of the Language Collaboratory. The Language Collaboratory is a partnership for the advancement of intercollegiate dialogue on the teaching of languages and cultures, driven by language centers and institutes at the University of Iowa, the University of Michigan, the University of Minnesota, Michigan State University, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Our aim is to provide collaborative professional learning opportunities for educators of language, culture, and literature at the 5 institutions, and beyond, of course. The Language Collaboratory spring sessions focus on situating language programs, language learning and instruction in a rapidly changing world society, responding to the needs and wants of spaces beyond the classroom. Specifically, our discussants will address ways of preparing students for success after they graduate, as well as increasing understanding of what success entails post-graduation. You're all invited to contribute to what we hope will be a lively discussion. The sessions will be recorded and made available through the YouTube channel for the Language Collaboratory. We encourage you to subscribe to our channel so that you can receive updates when new content is available. We ask that you mute your microphone at the outset, that you use the tools in Zoom to contribute questions and comments in the chat. During the open discussion period, please raise your hand virtually prior to activating your microphone. Closed captioning is available through the live transcript button in a Zoom menu bar. And today we will hear from Parker Henry and Elisa Troncoso, editor content developers at Duolingo. The title of today's session is From Language Students to Duolinguists. We hope that you will contribute to the presented ideas and we will all engage in a discussion afterwards. One more note before we begin, I'd like to encourage everyone to attend our next session, which will be held on Monday, April 24th at the same time. On that date, we will welcome Dominic Butler-Borwa and Mabel Rodriguez, University of Michigan Residential College. Their session is titled Language Beyond the Classroom, Engaging with Communities of Migrant Workers and Asylum Seekers. I hope you will be able to join us. And then at the end of our session, we will share a link and we'll invite you to provide feedback about it. So please consider providing your input as we really appreciate your comments. And now, without further ado, let's begin.
All right, thank you everybody for this warm welcome. Greetings from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm gonna share my screen and we can probably get started. So just to preface, we made this presentation thinking about language educators in mind, specifically college professors who may have language students who are interested in industry jobs. But if you yourself are interested in going into industry, this presentation also probably is good for you too. So we're going to give some introductions. We'll talk about some skills that we picked up in the language classroom that we're using in our day-to-day work at Duolingo, and then just some general skills for entering industry as a job seeker.
Awesome. So as Park said, thank you so much for welcoming us to the Collaboratory. I'm Elisa. I'm an educational content developer at Duolingo, and I have degrees in Hispanic linguistics. I have been a Spanish instructor for 7 years or so, and also a creative writing instructor for 10 years. Here at Duolingo, I am co-owner of the Spanish course, and I work with content a lot, basically just looking at how content is fun, engaging, communicative, useful, and quirky overall. In my free time, as you might imagine, I love learning languages, doing some arts and crafts, and taking care of my plants. What about you, Parker?
And my name is Parker, where Elisa works on the Spanish course. I work on the English courses at Duolingo. I'm also an educational content developer. So if you're using the Duolingo app, educational content developers are basically working on anything that is not like a translation-based exercise. So whether that's the podcast or the non-translation exercises or a new feature called Duo Radio or all kinds of like longer form, more creative content. So I worked on the English course for Spanish speakers, for Portuguese speakers, for Japanese speakers. For a long time, I was on a product called Duolingo for Schools, which puts Duolingo content in the hands of educators. And right now I'm using AI to try to generate content better and faster for our courses at Duolingo. So first, we are going to talk about a few skills that you can build or foster in a language classroom and how they are serving us today at Duolingo. So the first one I think is like general typological knowledge. I think I remember being in school and learning how to do a lot of things, and no matter what the subject, I learned a lot of processes, and learning a process can often lead you to the right answer, but it doesn't give you a bird's eye view of the entire system. So some examples I have is in math, I remember learning how to make an improper fraction, and you multiply your denominator by the whole number, and then you add your numerator. And if you follow this pattern, you will always get the right answer. So learning this process did lead me to success, but it didn't really lead me to an overall view of the problem I was solving. Similarly, I remember like learning scales on the piano, and I remember when you learn a G major scale, you have one sharp. You have to memorize there's one sharp. You're going to play one black key when you start on G. And I think that's how I memorized a lot of scales when learning music, but it doesn't really show the system very well either. Both of these are kind of like memorizing steps. Which do lead to correct results, but don't necessarily show the whole picture. So I think it's much better to learn a system, which is what we're kind of using when we plan content at Duolingo, when we create content at Duolingo, when we think about the entire learning process and how we want to scaffold and sequence things within the app. So when I'm multiplying and adding those numbers, really what I'm doing is I'm accounting for these orange and these blue pieces. And using a system like this really gives me a better view of the problem at hand. Similarly, a major scale is just a system of different steps. So it goes whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And if you start on G, it just makes sense that you'd have one black key, because if you follow this system, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, you'll have this F sharp in there. So applying this to language, what this kind of looks like is I remember in language classes learning like lots of tables with conjugations where you'd alter the ending, where you'd take this vowel and you'd change it, where you'd, memorize these patterns. And those lead to a process that you can replicate to get the correct answer. But it doesn't necessarily show mastery of the system. And that's not to say that this is a bad way to teach. In fact, it's like a really good stepping stone, to be honest. But I think there's farther reaches that we can push this. So the example that Elisa and I came up with was the subjunctive in Spanish, which is notoriously tricky to get right. So I think that often we learn rules like, okay, if you have a verb plus K, then the next verb will be the subjunctive. Or if you memorize this acronym like, oh, use a weirdo verb, and then the subjunctive is what follows. So when you express uncertainty or impersonal expressions or doubt or denial, so you memorize all these letters and you try to think of the situations or memorize the situations where you would use the subjunctive. And what's tricky about this process is that it's not always the case. So a much better way to think about this, I think, is thinking about what types of situations and circumstances you might use the subjunctive in, and being really comfortable with the idea that it's this mode that we're using where things are like possible or impossible, contingent, hypothetical, or not necessarily fact. Because the stronger a grasp we get on this, the better we can, like, with almost certainty, identify when to use the subjunctive. And this is what's really salient in work at Duolingo. Because we don't provide a whole lot of explicit instruction on the app, it makes it all the more important to sequence things in a way that makes a lot of sense. So if I have a really broad overview of different modes in Spanish, of when to use the subjunctive, I can plan my lessons better. Within a skill, I could like set a context or a theme for the skill that teaches the subjunctive in different categories that would really lend themselves well to that type of content. So expressing regrets or speculating about a secret life could be something really useful when teaching the subjunctive to set as like the context. And then additionally, the more I know about how this system works as a whole, the better I can sequence content. So if I have a good idea that the learners on Duolingo have mastered the subjunctive, I probably can easily teach polite commands in Spanish, because those are basically just the subjunctive in a different form. So having this bird's eye view is definitely helpful when transferring what you've learned in the language classroom and how you can teach in a language classroom to encompass a system so that students can apply it within an industry context. The way I'd see this at play in a language classroom would be like, I see a lot of questions like this in language assessment and in like exercises that you might see in a classroom. And it's like to alter the verb to put it in the right form. And I think there's a place for this. I think there's definitely value in being able to drill and manipulate things so that you get used to the patterns. But really, I think what builds this skill is being able to provide explanations for why you alter different conjugations and forms of verbs or inflection of any type of grammatical structure. So for example, in this one, I have 3 verb structures. 2 of them do not use the subjunctive, 1 does. And the 2 that don't use it are a little bit tricky. One has quiere, which is almost it's sometimes a trigger for the subjunctive. One has que, which is a trigger for the subjunctive, but really it's only the first one that uses it. So being able to identify which one uses this part of the system and then being able to provide an explanation for why is what really builds this skill, I think. The second thing that I think is really salient within work at Duolingo is awareness of the language learning journey. I feel like a lot of people come to me and they say like, oh, I'm not ready to work in a language profession, or I'm not ready to work at Duolingo because I am not fluent in my target language, or I'm only at like B1 in my target language and so I'm not ready. And really that's not a detriment at all. In fact, it's a really beneficial thing to be a language learner and to have scope of what language learning is about and to have empathy with language learners with where they are. So we use the Common European Framework of Reference, or the CEFR at Duolingo, and it's really how we base almost all the difficulty that we're injecting into our lessons. And so being aware of this scale is one thing, but being able to relate to learners on this scale, I think brings it to the next level. So like we have these archetypal sentences in our Duolingo toolkit that kind of exemplify each CEFR level. And so being able to remember myself when I was learning a new language, like when I was at around A1 level, like what could I do? What structures did I know how to use? What kinds of things was I able to accomplish with the language that I had? And bringing that up to B2, like what structures was I more comfortable with then? What was I able to read? What was I able to say? What was I able to understand? And then finally, like to C2, like what can I say in my native language? What might be difficult for a language learner that I don't find difficult as a native speaker? Being kind of intimately familiar with this spectrum and not necessarily seeing it as a spectrum, but seeing it as a journey that you've taken is definitely helpful as well. And a way to bring this into your classroom is self-evaluation. I think that like I was asked to do this when I was a language student and I thought it was kind of corny, but like looking back, it actually is really something that I can use as a benchmark within my work now. So I took like the writing section for the CEFR. This is pulled directly from the website. And asking students to rate themselves based on what they can do with writing. And then making a list of structures that they feel comfortable writing themselves really gives a good like stop point to check on their progress.
Another important skill, aside from the ones that Parker mentioned, is just to be creative under constraints. And the way to understand this is if you imagine you're an architect and you're told, okay, you have to build a library, and you start to think about the things you need to take into consideration when building a library. So for example, you're thinking about the weight of the books, the organization, that you need study places, that you need restrooms, that you need all of these things to try to like form a plan that might work. But still, architects are able to build really awesome and amazing buildings like the Library of Congress. So if we think about language and class instructions like that, you can understand what it means to be creative under constraints. In Duolingo, and this is a really good example in the exercise that you can see on the screen, we can think of a lot of constraints when writing exercises to teach the subjunctive, for example. So we think about screen size, we think about the length of the item, but also the length of the gaps. We think about the approach we're going to take. If we're going to teach grammar concepts, if we're going to teach meaning or vocabulary words, we also think about scaffolding things. We think about how much time a session will take, because when you're in a classroom, you can really see how your students are reacting, if they're tired or they need to do something different. But through an app, things really, really change. Another example is when we know that students will struggle, learners will struggle with a concept, we add these tips or small explanations that are in simple words to help guide them towards these right answers, right? So a difficult concept in Spanish would be the difference between ser and estar and use them in different places, right? So we provide the explanation and then we test. And we discovered that after this small test, learners are able to answer it correctly 95% of the times, which is really, really cool. And in the classroom, this is very simple to apply. So you can have any creative language to use, any targeted activities are great places to start working on this, but you can add your own constraints to projects you already have. So for example, when I was a teacher, I used to ask my students to create a lot of videos of them talking Spanish because of COVID and teaching during the pandemic. And you can add constraints to these videos with just asking to use specific vocabulary words or specific structures that you're practicing right now in your class. So now that we've talked a little bit about skills and things we practice every day at Duolingo, we wanted to just talk about where to start. Your students sometimes may feel lost or just a little bit, confused about the industry jobs. And one thing that I experienced when I started looking for industry jobs was, hey, my skills don't quite fit into this, or I don't have any of these skills that I see in the job ads. But that's not true. Your students and yourselves actually do have them. It's just a matter of framing them into what the industry calls them. So for example, your students may say, hey, I'm just writing a thesis, or I'm just writing a paper. Well, they're actually practicing critical thinking skills, problem solving skills, just being resourceful at all times. Your students may say, I'm only teaching a language, or I'm only teaching this class, but they're actually practicing a lot of communication skills, a lot of just giving and receiving feedback when they are having student evaluations. They're always giving and receiving feedback. And finally, if your student says, hey, I'm giving talks, I'm going to conferences, I'm writing papers, well, they're actually really good at breaking down abstract concepts into concrete ideas. All of these skills are really valuable in industry jobs, and it's just a matter of knowing how to name them.
So the next section is just like about general tips for entering industry and really entering any professional job setting. One thing to note that Elisa and I are not super involved in hiring. So these aren't decisions that we're making so much, but it's a process that we've gone through. And so we're kind of just speaking from our own experience. So the first part is creating a portfolio or a profile, and really in most of the professional world, LinkedIn is kind of just the space to do that. So having some sort of public online presence to present professional accomplishments and to connect with other people is actually really useful when job searching, both for the job seeker and for the company. Some tips that I would suggest are I think people are looking for presence over perfection, meaning you don't need to be posting something every day. You don't have to have a detailed list of every single thing you've done. Really, I think most of what recruiters are looking for is that you are active, that you are a real person, that you are kind of engaging in spaces where you are interested in entering. So by no means does this mean you have to be a LinkedIn influencer, but having some sort of presence definitely does help when sifting through candidates. Another thing is this is an arena to showcase work. There's a lot of sections in LinkedIn that allow you to post videos or projects or papers. And I think that students often feel kind of hesitant or it's not the right forum for that, but especially within language related jobs, seeing any creative use of language or any step on your language learning journey is definitely helpful for evaluating a candidate. And again, not looking for perfection, just looking for creative language engagement. And then this is useful for recruiters and hiring managers just to get a look at who your students are, but it's also really beneficial for your students. The more you're engaging in spaces with language professionals, the more aware you are of opportunities that exist out there. I think a lot of language related jobs aren't necessarily on people's radar, but the more you engage with this professional community, the more they are, and the better it is to get your foot in the door and get to talking to people. And speaking of talking to people, the next thought that I have is the importance of informational interviews. And this is just really cold emailing or cold LinkedIn messaging people in a field that you're interested in and asking to like talk about their life for a couple minutes. I think this is a really good way to build a lot of skills and get a lot of insight into industry jobs. But there are a couple things that I want to emphasize when highlighting this. The first is that I think people are really, really nervous to reach out to people that they don't know. And they think that, oh, they're going to say no, or they're not going to answer, and they're going to be so annoyed or frustrated or mad at me. I get so many requests on LinkedIn to talk just about my own job or to answer questions and stuff. And I cannot accommodate all of them. So I have to say no a lot. But it's not out of malice or out of frustration or out of annoyance or anything. It's just due to a lack of time. So when someone says no to you or ignores your request, it's not at all a personal reflection on you. In fact, there will likely be lots and lots of no's, and that shouldn't bear poorly on you at all. And in fact, if you ask 10 people to talk and one of them says yes out of 10, that's a 10% success rate, but you still could gain a lot of really valuable information. So even a small success rate could be really, really valuable depending on who's willing to talk to you. The next, oops, looks like my animation is not. Okay, there we go. The next is it just gives good exposure to interviewing. I really feel like interviewing is a skill that you have to build, and it's better to build that in low stakes environments than high stakes environments. So even though you are kind of the interviewer or the student is the interviewer asking about these types of opportunities, it's like talking to a professional in kind of a formal context, and it allows for students to, practice those important interviewing skills. And then finally, I get a lot of LinkedIn requests, and I would say it's a little bit more justified to me to answer a LinkedIn request if they come with a message. I feel like you wouldn't just hand someone a business card without saying anything to them first. And I feel like students' messages don't need to be super well crafted or have any specific aim behind them, but just a hello, I'm interested in what you do, I'd love to connect kind of message, really, I think, ups the chance of making more connections and building a network.
And finally, your students may say, okay, I'm ready, but I don't know what I want to be. I don't know what I want to do. And all the jobs have different names, so I don't know what they mean. So the first thing that we want to encourage your students and yourselves to do is just to research and read a lot of job ads. And specifically focus on the part that says you will. What will you be doing? And so you look at these keywords and you look at, okay, work with curriculum designers, review, edit, and proofread. Okay, I kind of see what I'm going to be doing. And this relates a lot to the way I introduce myself. And what I mean is, so there's 3 main bubbles of myself that I was looking for in a job ad, right? I love teaching Spanish, I love linguistics, and I love creating writing. So I look at these keywords that I just read and I see, okay, this kind of connects to what I love doing, and it connects to who I want to be and what I want to do for the few years or the rest of my life, who knows. And so that way they can start identifying areas of themselves that could work really well with this type of jobs. Then it's great if you look at the second part of a job offering that says, okay, you need to have this kind of things, and then identify all the keywords that appear in there. So experience teaching English, creative instincts, proficiency in American English, other languages, and you start to understand these keywords in order to apply them to your own materials. So you tailor your materials like your CV, your resume, your cover letter to include all of these keywords, and that way you can become a better, more suitable candidate for any job position that it's being offered. So in general, what we recommend to help your students is just encourage a lot of practice. Practice incorporating keywords, as I was mentioning, inside any task you can write keywords. It may be a task about language, it may be a task about formal language or formal academic writing. Practice elevator pitches for research-focused jobs or any type of jobs. I remember one of my teachers used to ask us every single time, every single class, the first 5 minutes, just to make us say what our research was, what our project was, what were our objectives, what were the results, how would we identify them. And this practice made me really, really able to just explain things to other people who may not be involved in the same research I was. And finally, if you're a mentor or if you have time with your students, we would really encourage you to answer and practice common interview questions. As Parker said, a low stakes scenario is better than when you're already in the interview and you don't know what to do. We also want to invite you to encourage them to have career conversations in general or with you as a mentor, and to apply when something is open. As a reminder, industry calendars do not work like academic calendars in the sense that they don't have a cycle. Academic calendars are open every fall and then they close in spring and you get an offer if you get accepted, while industry calendars will just open when something is needed and close the position when they have filled it, and that's it. We also want to encourage you or your students to apply even if you're not done with your studies. That's okay. Practice is great for this type of things. And even if you don't fit 100%, because who knows, right? You may be surprised.
And with that, we want to thank you for having us today. There is a QR code at the top to the Duolingo careers page. It might not be super relevant right now, but as the quarter comes to an end, I anticipate probably a lot more job listings. And we'd love to open up the floor to questions, whether that's like really specific or really broad, or, about what we do, about some of these processes, about anything we talk about today.
Okay, we got a question in the chat, and I'm not forgetting about the AI question that was up there. So we can start with this.
So if someone wants a representative from Duolingo to speak to a large group of high-level language students considering a career there, is there a preferred way we should reach out to you? I would say we heard about this talk internally. I'd maybe reach out to like info@duolingo.com.
Yeah. Yeah, we can find a specific email, but we definitely have different people thinking about this.
Yeah, why don't I put my email in the chat, actually?
Okay.
Actually, it's really, really easy for those who need it. It's
Yeah, you can also put mine. Our emails are really fun. So mine is Elisa@duolingo.com and Parker is Parker@duolingo.com.
great. We can share this presentation with the organizers, who can probably pass it on to all of you.
And we had the AI question that says, let me see if I can find it. I think it was Adolfo. Do you mind reading your question? Because
I can ask it too. I was just curious if you have like one main takeaway that you could point to in regards to using AI as for generating content, like what's one main affordance that you have found, and whether you're using in-house or a public AI. I don't want to call specific tools, but someone comes to mind.
Yeah, so we're using OpenAI's GPT-4 model. We have alpha access to it, which from my understanding just means like our pipeline runs a little bit more directly from like their source to our content. I'd say what I've been learning about it, and it's not been that long, is that it's a powerful tool. I think when people start using it, they're very excited and shocked at what it can do. But like, we're really trying to hone in what it's outputting into a very particular format and with a very particular pedagogical goal. And that is very hard to steer it toward. So I have been reading some articles about like, it's smart until it's dumb. And that really feels salient to me now. We're also learning that it does much better in English than in other languages. So I feel like we may need to tailor it to, we may need to go language by language to really focus our efforts on making sure the output is good.
I see Jose Luis has his hand raised.
Yeah, you want to come off mute?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for your presentation and your tips. I just have a question about, because I saw that the example that you gave for the job post, it was for a master's student, like master's students, but do you also have like positions for PhD or not, or how does it work? Like
Yeah, I think to preface right now, hiring has definitely slowed down just due to the tech landscape. But I think a breakdown of our department might be useful. So we're in the learning and curriculum function at Duolingo, or department. And that is probably the most salient to folks in this room. And there are 3 job positions in this functions. So the first is learning scientists, who are really looking at like the cognitive science behind learning and trying to make the app more powerful to help people learn. And those are all PhDs. Then we have curriculum designers, which is a mix of PhD and master's folks. Some of them have really specific and narrow language expertise, and some have really broad language expertise. And they're really planning like the structure of the course, what to teach and when. And then our position, educational content developers, is also a mix of master's and PhD. And it is focused on, like we said, kind of the longer form, more creative content within the app.
Thank you. Just what, like the first thing that you mentioned, the first type of job, what was it again? Something about learning?
Learning scientist.
Learning scientist. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And those will have different names in other companies. So just, I encourage you to look around. They are similar positions, but they have different names.
Yeah. I see Kendall's hand.
And sorry to interrupt. Since we have reached the hour, we're going to turn off the recording, although we will continue our conversation for a few minutes for those who still have questions or comments.